Hello to my favorite listener base. This is George with the Vanguard, and I'll just be upfront about this episode. It's going to be pretty short because I'm introducing a series that hopefully will continue over the course of multiple episodes in the future. Maybe not all immediately in a row. It will obviously be interrupted by the occasional more current events based information in episodes, but the idea here is that I'm trying a new little paradigm. DJ Trump and I have both decided that on our respective brands, we're trying to add some multi-part series on various different issues, often that are not necessarily timely or necessarily related just to the current moment, but rather that are more historical in nature or sometimes just longer term. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce the first of such series, at least for me, which is going to be about the topic of the Anglosphere. So, for those of you who do not know or have not been very educated on the matter, the concept of the Anglosphere isn't anything new. It, to an extent, has existed since the British Empire started. Obviously, at that point, then, the Anglosphere was the empire, because the places in which English was spoken were almost all, if not all, at different times, British colonies or other sorts of British dominions, British protectorates, etc. So, the arguably British North America, which would later become the United States and Canada and even various Caribbean countries, ended up were part of the Anglosphere then and still are today. Then Australia, New Zealand, arguably parts of Africa, some of Asia, even Ireland is another European country that's often considered to be part of the Anglosphere. So it can have a pretty expansive definition. Some countries as tangentially related to English as, say, the Northern European countries that don't even speak English natively but that have widespread English use can be loosely considered part of the Anglosphere. For the purposes of this series, we're probably going to consider mostly the 5 core countries of the Anglosphere. And these are generally a widely accepted group of countries that are most connected to the Anglosphere. So, for reference, those countries would be the United Kingdom itself, and then its former colonies of Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. The reason for picking these countries has a lot to do with their very specific and close cultural ties to the motherland and their very overbearing, well, I wouldn't say overbearing, let's say very strong and very dominant use of English. So Canada is really the only one that has very significant official use of any other language, namely French, because Canada is officially a bilingual country. But aside from Quebec, no other major part of the country uses French very heavily. Now, some of the maritime provinces use it a little bit, but not to the extent that Quebec does for certain. And English certainly predominates outside of Quebec. And then in the United States, of course, we have many languages. Spanish is very prominent, at least in the Southwest especially, and in certain bigger cities. Other languages are spoken as well from more recent immigrant communities or older immigrant communities or even Native American languages, but English is by far the dominant one. And I would say a similar story is true in Australia, and in New Zealand, it is a little interesting because the Te Reo Maori, so the Maori language of their native population, is spoken significantly by Maori, but it definitely English still predominates. And of course, in the United Kingdom, Scottish and Scots, Irish and Welsh aside, and even Cornish and all these other languages, English definitely predominates. So that's one thing, is that these countries are staunchly English speaking. They also tend to have a strong legal similarity to the United Kingdom, so they all share a common law heritage. Not that they don't have any civil law or any other legal structures within their countries, but they're mostly are based in common law. They tend to be predominantly of European descent, such that often people can go between the countries and, feel at home. And I think that definitely has a bearing on it. Obviously, they are all now fairly racially diverse societies, and that is not a prerequisite to be part of the Anglosphere, is to be of any particular ancestry. But I do think it has impacted those societies very differently than, say, the predominantly black Anglo-Caribbean countries, or say the predominantly black African countries that speak English, or say India, which has a lot of English but is, of course, predominantly of the South Asian set of ethnicities. And again, that I think has made them have a little bit more regional ties and fewer ties with the United Kingdom and with the other such states. So I think those are the criteria that I would say. Well, one more criterion that's important: economic development. So all of these countries, even New Zealand, which I would say of the five, has the weakest economy and is also the smallest. But I would say they all have highly developed economies, and that leads to a certain kind of cultural bond and the ability for them to cooperate also in many tangible ways. So they do have the Five Eyes, which is an intelligence collaboration effort between the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada. They have an immigration cooperation movement. They have like trade relations, at least in informal channels. So there are a lot of connections between these five core countries that I'm going to focus on, but occasionally we will bring in some of the more peripheral Anglosphere countries to describe their relationships with it. And that is all I really have to say for now. I'm going to be working with sometimes with DJ Trump and probably sometimes on my own to keep this series going, this mini-series, and hopefully we'll even get to have some interviews with residents of the other Anglospheric countries. So obviously, I'm an American. DJ Trump is an American. We have a very strong understanding of what it means to be American and the English heritage in America, but we're going to also try to make sure that the other countries get some representation so we can also understand how they view their participation in the Anglosphere. On that note, that is all I have to say for today. So thank you for listening, and I certainly hope that you guys will enjoy the Anglosphere mini-series, because I think that it will be very informative to see how do Americans, how do Canadians, British people, Australians, and New Zealanders fit into the world as members of the Anglosphere, and how do also these peripheral states and states that have nothing to do with the Anglosphere, how are they all affected by this phenomenon? So thank you, and I will be back soon with a second installment of the Anglosphere mini-series. So this is George from the Vanguard signing off.